please welcome Art and Flynn.
Thank you, Rebecca. Yeah, and there are some really exciting new technologies in development in the exhibit hall, so I can appreciate the need to go through, and there's a lot there to go through. And maybe one of the things that we might be thinking about here, there still is always that human side. Technology can only do so much, and knowledge really doesn't manage itself. And very often we neglect the human component in the work that we're doing, in the knowledge work that we're doing. And sometimes that can really come and bite us, as we'll see when we talk about turbulent times. Because technology, and especially the AI systems that are very algorithmically oriented, they tend to be deterministic, meaning I can collect all of this massive data that's available, and I can identify trends and extrapolate and then say, wow, look what this trend is either building up or trending downward, and you can make adjustments in your strategy according to that. And some of those trends are fast moving, some of them are slow moving. But then there's the other part. I don't know, has anybody heard the term black swan? You know what the term? You're right. And a black swan is what? When something comes totally out of the blue that you hadn't expected, or maybe somebody was whispering a little warning in your ear, and you say, yeah, that's right, but we got to focus on this, and then boom. So that's what we're going to focus on today in this session, and even give you some tools, particularly in the form of a methodology and an audit questionnaire that we'll walk through a little bit of, just to give you the highlights of, to show you what sort of things you can do to bring human talent, human perception, the human ability to have what we call foresight. Not doing the predictive part, which machine analytics do very well, and give you a probability of the occurrence of an event, but looking out intuitively and say, I have a sense that there's something around the bend here that we're not quite sure what it might be. We better get ready for it. So that's the essence of what we wanted to show you. So give you a quick outline of what we're going to talk about. We'll basically give you our thesis and the outcomes that we hope you can take away from this. Flynn's going to talk a little bit about turbulent times as to what we mean by that, and then go into the futures risk and opportunity methodology, give you the highlights of that. It's a three-phase methodology, and you'll be able to grab enough of that to begin to implement that in your organization. And of course, then the question is, well, how does that apply to knowledge management? And of course, knowledge management should be beginning to be ingrained in your organization, should not be a separate thing anyway, right? People are nodding their heads. So definitely part of, maybe, well, let's put it this way. Raise your hand if your organization has a strategic planning group within it. Keep your hand up if knowledge management is being effectively applied in that strategic planning group. Okay, wow. So a few hands up and a few chuckles. So this is, we're going to bookmark that and so one of our objectives for you that we can hopefully impart to you today is how to bring those two worlds together, because in a lot of our experience, we do not see effective application of knowledge management principles to the world of strategic planning. And you say, well, isn't that one of the most important functions of an organization is you get knowledge management has been applied certainly into the day-to-day processes. But you equally need to, it's of equal importance and maybe even more to back away and see, looking out over the strategic horizon, how can we apply our brain trust there? And it may even be a different brain trust. And part of our methodology will be, how do you assemble that diverse brain trust and then engage them? And that's what the questionnaire that Flynn will go through will do, show you how to bring in people with different perspectives, different mindsets, different abilities, and engage them together in putting together a plan. And then ultimately, we'll show you some case examples of how to do that. But the ultimate goal is to, just like KM, to craft an initiative, a strategic initiative to help your organization plan for and respond to its various risks and opportunities, both those that are foreseen and maybe unforeseen. Does that make sense? Okay, great. All right, so you ready to go? Our thesis is very simple. Turbulent times actually increase the importance of an organization's capacity for three things, and these three things are very important. Foresight, again, different from prediction, the ability to see or to at least anticipate what's coming around the corner, right? Or over the horizon. You really can't see it. You can't do a statistical trajectory and see it, but intuitively you know something's there. The agility, everybody's, I'm sure, familiar with agility, the ability to quickly respond to change in your organization. And that takes a lot of KM, because if your knowledge pipeline, if your knowledge sharing activities are slow and sluggish, you're not going to be very agile. Does that make sense? Okay, so agility is a part of being able to respond to this. And then the resilience comes into play when all the foresight, all the planning and everything in the world, and that gets thrown out the window because a black swan event has occurred and maybe has knocked you down seriously, and you need to have some capacity in there to get back up and hopefully rebound even stronger than you were before that catastrophic event. Okay, so our goal will be in this is to craft a strategic initiative, what we call a capacity building initiative, to increase these capacities in these three areas. Okay, so that's number one. And then number two, I think it just kind of summarizes what I said earlier, that KM is critical to that, because so much of these three capacities involve human knowledge work, the capacity to gain insights and make decisions, insightful decisions that maybe a machine algorithm could not do for you. Okay? So and then the objective basically, yes, come away from here. Hopefully we'll give you some tools, resources, at least maybe some ideas or tips that you can begin to transform your organization into a fast learning enterprise of the future. And just by way of background, we did not go into the enterprise of the future. We had a workshop on this on Monday where we went a little bit more into the enterprise of the future, but where this all came together, we have been doing, our company and with the George Washington University, I've been doing work for the past 12 years on envisioning what we call the enterprise of the future. In other words, if you had the future enterprise, what would that look like? And we had some characteristics for that. And that was at George Washington University, and that gave rise to, if you follow the column in KM World called The Future of the Future, we've been writing that column for the past 12 years now. And so, take a look at that in some of the past articles. It's called The Future of the Future. And that was born out of our effort at George Washington University initially, and then we broadly expanded our constellation of experts and researchers, and we tried through that column to bring you the latest and greatest insights. Part of those connection with George Washington University, we managed to run into Flynn, and Flynn was doing this particular work, and we saw the connection between what we were doing to try to create the enterprise of the future, which was a fast learning, fast innovating, ability to respond quickly. And when we saw Flynn's body of work, we said, aha, let's try and bring this together. So that's why we're introducing this to you here for the first time, these two worlds, the enterprise of the future, which said we're not really going to go into, but just to let you know it's connected to that, and then this methodology. So with that, we'll talk about a little bit of setup of what turbulent times means, and then how you can best respond to that. So let me now turn this over to Flynn, and take it away. Oh, and you've got your wired up.
I'm going to try this. I sometimes do better when I wander around than when I try to stand in one spot. Yeah, thank you. I'll add one other thing to the objective, and that is to enjoy this. It's easy. I've been doing it all day. It's easy to sit out there and sort of be an observer as opposed to sitting out there and being a participant. And so I'm going to ask some questions. We're going to talk about something. I would actually like for you to at least think through that, if not shout out what you're thinking. And it's kind of difficult to do in a setting like this, but inevitably, if you've got interesting things to say, raise your hand, wag your hand, and depending on where we are in time, we're trying to get a lot done. I'd love to give other people a chance to add, change, or delete in terms of what we're talking about, how this applies to you. So let me just start off asking, how many of you believe that we're in turbulent times? Well, I think that's everybody. I haven't asked anybody that in the last several years that didn't say yes. Well, let me ask you this. What's causing that turbulence? By my definition here in a minute, that is turbulence. That's the definition of turbulence. It's when there's increasingly rapid change that creates an unpredictability in our decision horizon. Anybody else with a, yes? Again, yes, there's more and more information about more and more topics, which seems, certainly within ourselves, creates a certain kind of turbulence. Again, I made a couple points. You may ask yourself that, and you may ask some other people that. That's how I sort of got into this, and started asking people about that. And what I found out was that, A, people have their opinions about what's driving these kinds of changes, and B, they think everybody tends to agree with them. When in fact, from different perspectives, we see different parts of this, and it gives us a different angle on what is changing, what is the rate of that change, and more importantly, what does that mean to us? My assertion is that we're in a time where we have some real challenging macro-systemic changes going on that tend to be outside of our frame of reference. There's a push to get things into smaller and smaller time horizons so we get more granularity, when in fact some of the big stories are actually the bigger trends that you can't see when you look down at a quarter or a year. But if you move it out to a year or 5 years or 10 years, some important trends become very insightful. And part of the challenge is to get people to move into that discomfort zone that goes with imagining what happens when this turbulence doesn't die out, but turns into a disruption in our system, within our organization, within our customer base, within our suppliers, within the broader national and international framework we've developed. We've developed an extraordinarily efficient global system. The trade-off for efficiency is resilience. The trade-off for short-term focus is we often miss the longer-term trends that underlie the waves on top of those changes. So when I say turbulence, one of the things people always say is, well, things have always been changing. Everybody has always felt like they were at the point of the apex of turmoil. Well, in one way that's true. Things have always been changing. In fact, that's not it. That's not, I use the metaphor of river rafting. How many of you have been river rafting? Once. There's a lot of things I've done once. You know, when you set off in the river, it's moving, it's changing. The river's running as fast as it ever runs. It's just that the river's flat and wide. And the challenges of navigating in that environment are not too difficult. But as you move into rapids, the challenge becomes greater. And when you move into the first set of rapids, the hope is that it's going to clear up. How many of you have been on an airplane when all of a sudden it starts wobbling and bouncing, and you're just hoping, I hope this should stop. And when it finally does, after a minute or two, you're ready to order another cup of coffee or something else. Have you maybe been on a flight when it didn't stop? When it kept getting turbulent, you felt yourself going down, and there was this moment like, oh my God. I thought this was just temporary turbulence. This is actually much greater kinds of winds than that. And one of my metaphors I use is that we've been in the flat part of the river, in my opinion, for about 70 years, 75. Since the end of World War II, it's been same basic geopolitical framework, same basic financial framework, same basic globalization framework, same unification of standardization in all kinds of ways, market integration, and just, there have been changes. The river's been running, but we're just getting to the rapids. And we find this turbulence, and what we're hoping is that it's going to change. It's going to flatten out again and get back to usual. My belief is that we're in stage 2 rapids. Looking at stage 3 and realizing it's not going to get better soon. And how we navigate this next stretch is important. Now, whether we hit in stage 4 later or stage 5 and then come out to a wide river again, or whether there's a waterfall, is an interesting conversation. But hardly anybody's arguing that we're in turbulent times and they're looking like they're going to get more turbulent. There's greater independence, faster change, technologically underlying ecological challenges, cultural tipping points that we're nearing. There are things we're all aware of, and you don't see a lot of KM focus on them because they're not knowledge that information we had. They're about the future. And the future doesn't exist in the same sense as the past. There's no data in the future. There's no facts in the future. The domain of the future is a psychological domain where we look at how we think things work and we extrapolate those into the future. How many of you ever had a boss or senior management that made short-sighted decisions? We understand it's not like you're looking out a little ways. It's like you're only taking into consideration a time horizon or a time frame that leaves out some of the significant implications of choices you're making now. And that's why trying to use some of the same framework as knowledge management to deal with future possibilities is real important. And we've evolved this tool trying to respond to people saying, how do we identify the kinds of things that are coming, that are in the future? How likely is that to be? How big a deal is that? And are we prepared to turn that into an opportunity, or are we going to wait and treat that like a risk? So moving quickly, following that metaphor, there are certain things, there's always been change. Change is constant. But a lot of times it's our anticipated change. We see trend lines, we see how the world works, we've watched, and we can reasonably extrapolate that it's going to stay the same by changing in a understandable fashion. And then turbulence is when things are changing more rapidly, more unpredictably. And it's clear that there are underlying forces at work causing these kinds of changes. And from time to time, there are disruptive changes. When suddenly something happens that business as usual is not the option. You're going to have to do something to respond to this change in the system that you're a part of, as opposed to change in what's flowing through that pipeline. I'll just touch very briefly, but we focus on all 3 of these in our work. One is we all have personal turbulence in our roles, are changing, but we also in our lives and in our own personal arc in our lifetimes. There are time to time when we get sick, we have financial problems, career problems, relationship problems, things that cause turbulence in our life. And you look around and nobody else is experiencing that. There's also things that cause turbulence in our organizations. And depending on the sector you're in, the size and the role, those factors are different, but you can certainly have organizational turbulence. And then there's macro-systemic turbulence, the big systems that we're a part of. And those are what are changing more rapidly than they have in a long time. And that's the frame of reference we're having a hard time capturing because we've gotten shorter and shorter and shorter sighted when the trends that are unfolding, trends tend to give a linear kind of look. Cycles tend to repeat. And to look back for 3 whole months and say, it's been hot every day, I'm predicting 3 more months of heat, is to miss the cycles of the seasons. And when we put it in a broader frame, we can see cycles, beginnings and ends, and interrelationships that don't necessarily jump out at us when we're looking at immediate tactical data. So if you think we're in turbulent times, the question is, a personal question is, can you step up to that and not be scared enough to face sort of the implications? Can the organization look at some of the imperatives that are in sight but have not been on the agenda? And how do we communicate and talk about those changes we see coming? So my belief is that there are 3 core capacities. Now these capacities are always important, but the greater the speed of change, the more important they become. The first is foresight, which should be, in my opinion, for 30 years, I've been thinking, this should be a big part of KM, but it has not historically done that. Historically, KM has dealt with previously constructed information, not extrapolated probability. With big data, we're getting more and more of that extrapolation. We just can't see into those algorithms and the data they're putting through there. But our ability to have clear sight, foresight, again, we don't actually see into the future. We're actually studying the trends in the past and changing our algorithms for how we project the impact of that. And that is at the heart of knowledge management. Agility, Art mentioned this as one of the key factors. How do you create an organization that is more agile? My PhD from George Washington is in organizational behavior and development. I've been working on strategy and capacity building for a long time. Organizations are built for stability. The triangle, the hierarchy, is designed to maintain control and stability. And in flat parts of the river, that works well. When you get into the turbulent rapids, agility is not, stability has to trade off with agility, the ability to adapt more quickly. And again, that's a capacity that's built in. I've asked a number of senior executives, what does it look like when you're okay with it? Well, it's stable. As long as it's stable enough for me to work with, it's when it's crazy that I go crazy. And there are a lot of agility is not just leaders' ability to change, it's organizational's ability to adapt, to reshuffle resources, to change systems. And there are a variety of things that organizations do to increase agility. And then I say here, planned resilience. The classic is a fire, a possibility of a fire. What's the probability that this building's going to catch on fire today? Just in case it does, there's sprinklers. Somebody's thought through that. In your workplace, you have a fire drill you're supposed to go. A very simple kind of risk, but we've planned for that. How many of you are working in a place where there's emergency response, emergency recovery kind of planning? I've done a lot of that kind of thing where you make some assumptions and that would be horrible, but if that happened, what would you do? Resilience is not just the moxie to get yourself by the socks when you get knocked down. It also includes anticipating possible changes and preparing for those so that you both mitigate the probability and you can turn that change into an opportunity. Again, in many cases, all innovation is driven by the notion that there's changes that create new niches. And most of those changes are perceived too often as just risk. So I'm going to turn it back over to Art to do a little bit of orientation on this methodology, and then I'll be back to adding the second version of the course. So Art? The clicker, please.
And I have this on. The switch is on. So maybe the battery died. Yeah, I think the battery might have died because. All right. Well, let me just speak from here then. Keep things moving. All right. So the methodology has three parts to it. We'll go through these parts very quickly. And then also. Yeah. The methodology is based on a three-part framework. Phase one, a diagnostic for perceived risks and opportunities, and this is what we'll show you in a minute. We'll put a questionnaire associated with that as a tool, and that should be also available for you to download and take with you as a PDF file. But that's where you bring various members of your team. Remember that brain trust that we're looking for to bring the right knowledge to bear in at least planning and getting ready for this. Actually, yeah, this is, yeah. Oh, all right. Well, I'll maybe I should put this here. I'll just hold it. Yeah, because Flynn's going to come back right away. Flynn has a more booming voice than I do. He's good at practicing resilience and getting up because he was captain of a Division I college football team, and he got knocked down quite a few times. So he knows how to get knocked down and build back up. So that's phase one, bringing your brain trust together and taking the lay of the land, and we'll show you in depth how that works. And then phase two, once you identify those issues with different people in the room with different perspectives, coming up with issues and ideas that you might not have even been thinking about, then how do you analyze that? And then phase three is defining, crafting, formulating capacities to increase, exploit and better make use of those capacities that you already have that would be able to help you to deal with turbulent times. And then, of course, what gaps need to be filled in and what new capabilities and capacities you need to build into your organization. So basically three phases. So phase one, as I mentioned, we have a questionnaire. You bring the right people to the table, as diverse a group as possible, but decision makers and leaders in your organization. And then it's basically three things. What's the perceived probability of a disruptive event? What is the impact of that disruptive event? You're doing some brainstorming on what is the worst that can happen? What terrible things can happen to us? Remember, this is a risk/opportunity audit, so we don't want to focus entirely on everything that can go wrong. Also, what opportunities might pop up? What things can go right, and if we're in the right place? And, of course, you can blend the two together. If everything goes wrong, how can we position ourselves to actually turn that into an opportunity? And then also to then lead into what do we do about it and formulate a capacity building initiative. The third criterion will obviously be where is our capacity for doing that right now very low. So that's phase one, and phase one consists of this survey tool, which I'll turn back over to you.
All right.
And you can use even the, yes, please.
Well, yeah, I'll just respond to that. Yeah, I think it is not traditional. We're here talking about knowledge management. What does this have to do with, this is not traditional knowledge management. You bring this up, they're asking you, what are you bringing this up for? We got a risk management group. We don't need the knowledge management group asking about risk. That's the gist I'm getting. My sense is that there are consequences with silos. I've been in 2 sessions today about collaboration, about who does what and who knows what. And the reality is that people on the front line are seeing early signals, early warning signals, that they don't want to bring up the line in some cases because the messenger gets shot. And so there's a lot of cases where there needs to be a value on listening to the people that are in the field, that are in divisions, that are in products and roles, that see changes in the future that can be collected and converged into knowledge support, decision support knowledge tools. And that's whether that's historical knowledge of changes or even perception of changes that are occurring is knowledge management. It just has not traditionally been treated that way. So I'm gonna, oops.
Well, we want
Yeah,
to go
no,
through it now, right?
Yeah. I'm just gonna go quickly through here. Again, this is 45 minutes. We're trying to do what we did in 3 hours yesterday and what I normally do in a one-day workshop. So we're skimming across the top, but basically this just gives you a sense of the kind of approach we're using, is that there's a certain set of macro systemic disruptions, and these are very broad categories. And then there's a set of internal or market or sector-based market and operational disruptions. We typically actually break these first 3 or 4 out into their own category and identify the kinds of technologies, the kind of regulations, the kind of competitive changes that that organization is focused on as relevant. And then we give people the opportunity to answer essentially 3 questions that over the next 5 years, what is the probability that this kind of disruptive event will occur? You may think that's very low, or you may think it's very high. This is where people can be bewildered. Come on, you really think that? You think nothing's going on in climate change? But some people don't. And then you say,
That's where you get to see and understand people's subjective views on a particular possible disruption and talk about it and communicate.
which can be very uncomfortable. Almost any time you get out of your comfort zone, it's uncomfortable. And so when we move outside of the given, generally accepted notion that if we just whistle, then the graveyard goes away. And in addition to that, there's a really important question. This is the essence of risk. What's the probability of the event, and what's the impact? Because something could happen and it's no big deal. There are other things, if it happens, it's a big deal. And so this is dependent. And then the next question is, what is your perception of the level of preparation to either take advantage of this opportunity or to mitigate this risk? Essentially what we're looking for when we use this tool, and we customize this traditionally, because these are very high-level, generic kind of categories, but when we customize it, and again, depending on who you ask in different parts of the world or different parts of the company, you get some different kinds of interesting answers. But the point is that we want to, and then we have a set of internal factors as well. We're looking at the organization's capacity for foresight, agility, and resilience. And always, someone says, well, what do you mean by this? What do you mean by that? And I said, well, let's talk about that, because that seems to be something that's important to you. Let's clarify and try to help other people. But the point is when you find things where there's a high degree of probability, a high degree of impact, and a low level of preparation, that's a priority situation. And until people put it in that frame, I'm not thinking about that. And when it's put into that frame, suddenly you realize who's on top of that. And this is a tool to help, of all the things that might happen, all the things, which one should we focus on to actually try to develop some programs around? And that's what I'm going to give it back to Art to talk about. What kind of programming, what are the kinds of things that can be done to help organizations develop their foresight agility and resilience.
Okay. Okay, so again, going back to the first part here, in the workshop on Monday, the top three problems were, of course, political instability, because especially in the government regulatory environment, changes keep coming down, and some of them can be very impactful. Another one that came up was infrastructure failure, and and then of course in general technology changes. So those were the top three, and you may have your own. The idea is now having sat down with your diverse team and having identified these impact areas, the next thing, as we learned through KM, bringing KM to bear now, storytelling is impactful because you can, I know you probably get forecasts, reports, all kinds of warnings. You may get warning newsletter that all these terrible things are going to happen, or that all these opportunities can occur. And just reading about it doesn't really do anything. So, and we have found, working with real organizations, that coming up with scenarios, which brings the story to it, which brings out the emotion, and getting people, actually a best scenario would be if you can even come up with a tabletop simulation. I'll give you an example. An organization we worked with, a public health organization. This was back during the days of avian flu, bird flu. And this organization had come up with a checklist of items to better prepare and respond to something like a bird flu pandemic. You know, again, that's a turbulence. Could happen, might not happen. You're not quite sure until it unfolds. And many of the organizations that this agency was helping were scoring very low on their capacity. They built a tool, a diagnostic. They were scoring very low on this. And they were trying to figure out how to get these other organizations to respond and to be better prepared for a pandemic outbreak. And they had a simulation developed that just put out all kinds of data. Here's your probability of having this occur and that occur. Then the light bulb came on. They said, well, what if we develop a tabletop simulation and brought all these people here and played it out? Like the outbreak breaks out here, and you need to get to here. But by the way, you're no longer in the game because you're dead, and your whole area is quarantined. So, and think of what happened in Katrina, right? There were buses that could have transported people, but the keys to the buses were locked up in a door that somebody else had the key to. So if you, having phase one identify those key areas, phase two is developing a worst case scenario for what you consider the top disruptor, both in terms of probability of occurrence and high impact but low preparation. Write out a scenario, better yet tabletop, gaming, right? We see gaming is coming into KM. Do that to have that emotional impact of that possibility of that event occurring. But then flip it over, do a second scenario on what? Best case. How you can, if everything goes well, you can come out even better than you were before. So phase two is basically simply coming up with two alternative future scenarios aimed at your priority issue that you identified in phase one. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's not much more to that. Phase three then is now, if we want to realize the best case and make sure we don't fall into that worst case scenario, what capacities do we have that we can bring to bear, and more importantly, what capacities in our organization do we need to develop and formulate and apply resources to? And those capacities are in the area of foresight, agility, and resilience. And so again, just to get a quick check, anybody have any thoughts on what would be a good organizational capacity building initiative, or an area of organizational capacity that would help you to improve your foresight as an organization? Any thoughts? How would you improve foresight in your organization? Just any ideas? Yes, you. Very good. So, yep, Yeah, so what if, brainstorming sessions about what if scenarios. It's excellent. Any others? Second, so let's go to the next step. Now that I've got, so I've got a way to increase my foresight capacity. How would I bring agility to bear? Now, if I'm doing these what ifs, and now I see I've got a problem, where would agility? How can I build the capacity for agility in my organization? Either you or anybody else have any ideas for that? Increasing agility, yes. Okay, empowerment of staff to make decisions and execute, that's a big one. And with the added proviso, don't shoot the messenger, right? Because, so that's right, you cannot have the system clogged up, the decision pipeline clogged up, because that takes away your agility. So, right, so that would be a capacity building initiative to increase your agility. And how about resilience? Any ideas for an example capacity building initiative for resilience? That would be part of it, yes. So like Flynn mentioned the fire, what happened if this hotel caught fire, the sprinkler system, all those systems work. But there's the other part is, how do you recover? You've got smoke damage, you've got the smell, you've got to deal with all the departments to bring the hotel as quickly as possible back to capacity. So that is the plans involved in that. Okay, so everybody gets the idea. And where we say knowledge management, that's all nice, we know we need to do that, but now we really don't know. Who has the know-how, who has the knowledge in our organization to do that, okay? So that's what we say, identify knowledge gaps, risks, and opportunities. The knowledge gaps are knowledge that we don't have to respond to this in the right way. Risks might be a knowledge risk, meaning we have the knowledge, but that's one person, and if a catastrophe occurs and that we're unable to reach that one person, which is what happened, by the way, in a future pandemic outbreak. The person who needed to be reached was not reachable, and nobody knew what to do. So that's a knowledge risk. So as KMers, we say, all right, we have that knowledge to respond to this event, but if it's only in one person, that's at risk. How do we reduce that risk? And then, of course, opportunity, like we mentioned before, knowledge that's not being applied, that could be applied. Okay? So then we prioritize and formulate. Here's, you can download of examples of other capacity building initiatives just to give you an idea. When you see the common threads we talked about here, communication, the need for early, hey, there it is. All right, magically, just as we're ready to wrap up. That's the signal. Yeah. Early warning signs, of course, are good. And again, relating back to big data and analytics, so you have all this data coming in, but it takes know-how to say, what am I looking for? And when I do find what I'm looking for, what do I do with it? How do I develop and formulate a course of action based on these early warning signs, right? But you build this capacity one brick at a time with the sort of a view of how they would all be stitched together, from the early warning all the way to the response and the agility, and all the way to then, if worse comes to worse, how do we respond when everything falls apart? Okay, so we'll leave you that laundry list. We promised to give you some case examples, so we will do that, and then we'll open the floor to any additional questions you might have. Okay, so here's Flynn with some case examples of how this has worked.
I think the reality is we're out of time, and so we're gonna.
No. Yeah, we have to.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I thought we had 4:45.
Yeah, we're tracking right on time. Yeah, we have an hour. We're right on time.
All right.
So.
Thank you. This first example actually came. A number of our early clients came through investors asking us to go make sure these guys are paying attention to the future. Because most of the time they're whipping them to get quarterly or short-term kind of objectives. And investors are concerned about that, but they're also concerned about next quarter and the next quarter. And so our first number of these, we were sort of doing work in the healthcare area. And as you know, healthcare is one of those sectors that's really driven a lot by regulatory changes. This was sort of in the home healthcare area. And we went through this methodology, identified 3 areas that met the quality, highly probable that regulatory drivers would change in that area, big impact on their various software platforms and products they had that supported the old structure, and they had invested so much in the other platform, they really weren't doing much to think about shifting when the regulations required that they do so. And then we created 3 little task forces, and in each case developed some capacities that were really more early foresight-based. Instead of agility or resilience oriented, they were trying to say, how do we predict when and how that regulatory change will come forward? And the sad part of the story is they were right. They predicted effectively the changes and what it was going to take for them to adapt. It's just that they didn't follow through on it. And so when they did change, kind of like they thought, it did affect them, and they ended up having a lot of legal problems because they were selling systems that no longer supported what was required. And so even though they'd gone through this exercise, they stepped right in the hole anyway. So this does not solve the problem of short-sightedness. It just helps us understand the nature of it. Again, an investment firm asked us to look at a company in their portfolio that was really in a tech-based sector, and we identified a series of technology changes that could have real consequences. Again, technology is one of those places that when you innovate, you leapfrog, it's great, but when you've got a lot of investment in this particular frog, it's hard to leave it behind because it needs to be jumped over. And basically, this group did not follow our methodology and essentially said we need more knowledge. We need expertise from the outside to come in and really tell us about these technology changes and what's probably going to happen and so forth. And so they got one person in particular got real smart on these emerging and alternative technologies. And again, he had a real hard time getting the management team to listen, to pay attention. They agreed it was important. They agreed that changes. They agreed they'd ask him to do the research and bring in experts. It just, there wasn't the imperative to push this to the top of the list because we've got day-to-day decisions. And that's very common. Short-sightedness is one of the symptoms of our broader malaise. And even though you may see some of those things, whether or not we're willing to respond and build the capacity to deal with those is a different kind of management decision. In some cases, all you can do is lead a horse to water, but you can't make him think. So I'm going to give it back. We're going to open it up at this point. Open it up at this point for.
Yeah, why don't you stay there, right?
Okay, I'll stay here.
And I'll take the clicker.
You take the clicker.
And we will open up
What's
the floor
the
to questions.
fun part about standing here if I don't have a clicker?
So what? Yeah, it's like giving a college professor, torturing him, put him in front of a blackboard with no chalk or anything, right? Okay, so open the floor to what questions do you have for us? Okay, right up front, Rebecca.
So, what are some of the techniques that you use to help, particularly a management team, develop their foresight capacity and their strategic agility? Those two in particular.
Well, again, this tool has emerged as a way to get people to see other perspectives. And it's also a way to get agreement around priorities. And so when everybody sees that and everybody understands that, there's typically somebody is assigned the responsibility to do something about it. Now, if they assign the right person, they get things done. They assign the other guy, goes in the hole where all the stuff goes that you give that guy to get done. So there's no magic solution, but I do think that agility, I found most effective when it's tied to budgeting. Because a lot of agility has to do with moving resources around, people, money, and focus. And those are the kinds of things that what you want to do is to, the key is to have enough clarity about what I call the factors. What are the factors you're looking at, and what are the changes those factors will create, and how do you get some consensus? And when you have several people start coming in that say, we're starting to lose significant competitive ground in this product area or in this market because of these factors, we need to adjust. We need to adjust before next year's planning cycle. And one of the most difficult things, we need to adjust in a way the strategic plan didn't lay out 3 years ago. And so getting the ability to what I call mid-cycle planning adjustments, so you're not locked into, well, get to that next, I was like academic, oh, well, I'll get to that in 18 months when we're dealing with 3 years out. And anyway, that's one of the things I found to be a very effective thing, which is to, when necessary, call an emergency meeting and say, based on these factors, we need to consider making some budget changes or some strategic decisions to adjust.
Yes?
Have you had experience where you run different focus groups from different levels within the organization? So you get the view from perhaps the senior management, but you also do it at middle or even lower, just to get the different perspectives.
Yes, everybody get that? The question is, can we do this focus group, is just have these conversations at several levels of the organization to get everyone's perspective?
We've historically not done them as a big package like that, where we do a series of different levels. But we have on multiple occasions seen it go both ways, where people at the top say, oh, we got to get people on the front line closer to this issue. So you bring them up. And there are times when people who are running a business unit or a division or a product line or something like that look up and say, we're going to have to shift gears. We're going to have to take this case, this business case, upstairs and get them to spend some money they didn't plan on. And so at that point, there's a tendency to take those kinds of things up the ladder, usually when you're asking for more money. And what a lot of people don't do, and I think we all know this, there's a tendency to tell the boss what the boss wants to hear. They always say there's an incredible ability for a paycheck to influence someone's perspective. And a lot of times people make decisions, they invest money, they get lined up, I'm in charge, and what I don't want to do is hear the bad news. And so getting that bubbling up bad news usually has to be designed from the top, from the first place, or they won't tell the guy or the woman who's sitting at that driver's seat that the currents and the winds have changed until it's a very difficult maneuver, or it's too late to have some degradation.
Okay. Yes, question.
So the examples that you've shown so far are really focused at the business level, right? So with business continuity or capitalizing on opportunity, you could use the same methodology at the program or project level for people who are adopting KM or implementing service improvements along the line to do the same type of risk opportunity analysis which apply to a KM project. Have you done anything like that, taking it to a project or a program?
We have not yet used the sort of those two things, but that's actually what we're working on. Art's an old-time KMer, and I'm kind of a organizational capacity builder. And at the project level, I certainly see how that is very applicable. And the challenge is to include perceived probabilities of things and the time horizon and the potential impact of those, instead of simply looking at what's already happened. And it is a big leap when you move into the future the number one reason is there's no right answers. No one can be right now about the future.
This ideally would be part of your business case when you're going for the funding for those large projects and large programs, right? Because if
Right.
you did this as part of that business case, you've done all of your risk analysis and opportunity analysis. This would be a tool for doing that.
Yeah, excellent point, and I agree 100%.
Yeah, and one thing we've also learned along the way is people speak different languages. Someplace the key decision maker is focused on risk, and that's the language you sort of want to use to present. Others are focused on bottom line. Others are focused on market, breakthrough technology, making breakthroughs in the marketplace. So whatever their focus is, it's not finding a common language, it's almost the ability to speak in multiple languages, and that goes back to phase one where you said you want to get the diverse population in. Also, by the way, don't overlook the possibility of doing crowdsourcing, sending out these questions to a broad audience and just see what comes back. Again, we've got analytics, survey tools, analytical tools to do that. Okay, that about wraps. So as a quick wrap up, a few points we have here. Yes, we have been talking about organizations a lot, but would you agree that this could apply to us personally? I mean, a lot of people were hanging on the edge of their seat last night, wondering what the outcome of the election is either way, right? 51% here, 49% there. So yeah, turbulence is going to impact us individually as well as organizationally, and if we're not individually prepared for turbulence, how are we going to help our organizations, and vice versa? Does that make sense? So again, KM, personal and organizational KM come into play. And then make sure what your role, part of resilience and recovery is knowing what your role is and maybe a backup role. That's a key part of resilience we didn't mention, but very important. And obviously, it's armed services like the Navy. Some part goes out, another person takes over. The cook can come over and take over at a particular station. So knowing what your back role is, and then that communication, again, not shooting the messenger. So here's, you can see these points here, but just to wrap it up, one point I want to really bring home is the more turbulence that is present, the more valuable this becomes. Would you agree with that? That this stuff isn't so. It was why people don't worry about it when we're in calm waters. They don't even want to hear about this stuff. But as the turbulence begins to increase, or people, as we've all raised our hands, say, yes, we're in turbulent times. As turbulence increases, the value of doing this increases tremendously. Would you agree? Okay. So thank you very much for your participation. It was a very active engagement, and please let's continue the conversation. Here's how to get in touch with us, and we appreciate it very much. I'll turn the platform back over to Rebecca. Yep. Thank you.